Following a failed military coup in Turkey last summer, Turkish President Recip Tayyip Erdogan consolidated power and has since ruled his country in an increasingly authoritarian manner, particularly when it comes to journalists. Mahir Zeynalov is a Turkish journalist who documented the massive crackdown on journalists in Turkey and became the first reporter to be deported from Turkey by Erdogan. He now lives in Washington, D.C., and was in Pittsburgh recently to speak to the World Affairs Council. He joins me now. Mahir Zeynalov, thank you for being here.
Thank you.
And thank you also to Point Park University's Center for Media Innovation for welcoming us to their studios today. After the failed coup attempt, Zahir, how difficult did it become for journalists in Turkey to report on what was really happening there?
Well, Turkey has never been a paradise for journalists, and we always had problems with many journalists being in jail. But the scale of the crackdown on the media, especially in the aftermath of the military coup attempt, is staggering. This is unprecedented. Turkey is a world leader in the number of jailed journalists all around the world. We have, if I'm not mistaken, 151 media outlets were shut down after the military coup attempt. That includes 23 TV stations, 45 newspapers, 29 printing houses, dozens of radio stations, and at the moment we have 163 journalists sitting in prisons in Turkey.
We know that after the coup attempt, there was some paranoia on the part of Erdogan. He was out to squelch anybody who was saying something negative against him. But was there more to it than that?
Erdogan always were after journalists, really wanted to hunt them down, all these critical journalists, but he didn't have a chance. After the military coup attempt, he had this tremendous international sympathy and huge domestic popularity, which allowed him to further crack down on dissidents and mostly journalists. He calculated that the popularity he gained after the military coup attempt would actually give him a freer hand to put in prison many other journalists. And you know, in Turkey, I can't imagine a columnist or academic or journalist kind of challenging the official narrative of the government. You will either lose your job or your freedom. I mean, I'm not talking about, you know, an authoritarian countries like Russia or China or Iran. I'm talking about Turkey that was somehow democratic a decade ago and now transformed into a country that puts behind bars at least one journalist every day on average since last summer. Now we have dozens of journalists only from my newsroom. These are the colleagues that I work together, shared bylines and asked questions to public officials during press conference. I can only imagine what they're going through in prisons almost nearly 10 months now. And they're not even allowed to read a book, and visitation is limited, mistreatment is rampant, and we cannot even communicate through letters. And it's safe to say that we have the most educated prison population because we have nearly 3,000 academics, and some of them are celebrated professors are now in prison.
What were people like you, members of the press, reporting that upset President Erdogan? Why was he unhappy with you?
Right. Well, first, I mean, all hell broke loose when we had anti-government protest demonstrations, so-called Gezi protests in 2013 summer. And the international media was focused on that, and Erdogan was so troubled with that. So the crackdown on the media, dates back, longer than that. But after that, we had a corruption scandal that targeted President Erdogan and people in his inner circle. And one of the suspects is Iranian Turkish national Reza Zarrab, who is actually sitting in a federal prison in Manhattan on charges of bypassing US-led sanctions on Iran. So basically, Turkey helped this person to trade with Iran by passing the sanctions. And he bribed the Turkish officials, and that was the crux of the investigation. And I wrote about that. And President Erdogan pressed charges against me, seeking up to 6 years in prison. The charge is inciting hatred and animosity among public. This is the exact same Turkish Penal Code article that landed him in jail 16 years ago. He was reciting a poem that disturbed a judiciary back then, that was the military-backed judiciary, and he spent 3 months in jail, and he used the exact same Turkish Penal Code article trying to imprison me. And a month later, I was called in the police for questioning, and they asked me why I wrote things I wrote, and they defended myself in 5 days. They kicked me out.
And this is a country where, in accordance with democracy, where there was supposed to be freedom of speech and freedom of the press, and you're saying all of this is not happening now because
it's history now. I mean, at least we were like democracy on paper. Now it's gone too. Last month we had a referendum on constitutional changes, basically granting sweeping powers to President Erdogan, weakening checks and balances. He can dissolve the parliament, bypass the parliament, issue executive decrees, and you cannot appeal those. And he can declare emergency, like state of emergency. So now he is now a super president, although he was like a ceremonial president according to Turkish laws. So if there's anyone who is like saying, Turkey is a democracy, I mean, it's so obvious, what the Turkish government is doing there. And we have seen a little episode recently in Washington, D.C., when President Erdogan came here on May 16th. And while he was meeting with President Donald Trump at the White House, and while Trump was heaping praise on him, his bodyguards were kicking protesters, Kurdish protesters, just 2 miles away from White House. It was a textbook example of what many people in Turkey are going through. And that was a defining moment of Erdogan's visit here, rather than what they talked regarding Syria or some other bilateral issues.
What is important for Americans to know about the U.S. relationship with Turkey, and what should the United States do? How would you like to see the Trump administration handle him?
Right. Turkey is a very strong ally of the United States and the only Muslim member of NATO. And Turkey is working with the United States in fight against ISIS in Syria and Iraq. And there's a very strong partner in fight against ISIS. But now many people are also questioning if Turkey is a reliable ally or a liability, because we have a Turkish airfield called Incirlik in southern Turkey that the US-led coalition aircraft are taking off to bomb ISIS targets in Syria and Iraq. Turkey is threatening to shut it down. And I know that Angela Merkel just last week announced that maybe we should move that to Jordan. And those,
why is Turkey threatening to shut it down?
It's because there are a lot of things that the Turkey wants from the United States, and the United States turning a blind eye to those. And one of them is arming Syrian Kurdish militants. These are the fighters. This is the group YPG, and the political arm is PYD. They are the most effective and the most reliable ground forces.
And
in
Erdogan opposes these.
Yes, exactly. People. Erdogan believes that it's a sister organization with the PKK, Kurdistan Workers' Party, which is waging an insurgency war inside Turkey for more than 3 decades.
And our government in the United States is supporting them because they're fighting ISIS.
Not only supporting them, but in early May,
arming them.
President Trump actually signed a decision to send even heavier arms to Syrian Kurds as part of an anticipated offensive to take the Caliphate's Islamic State self-proclaimed capital Raqqa. And they are playing a very important role as part of these Syrian Democratic Forces. That's a Pentagon-backed rebel group, and most of the elements, military elements there, are composed of Kurdish fighters. And Turkey repeatedly called on the United States to halt support for this group, and that fell on deaf ears during the Obama administration. And President Erdogan was so euphoric when President Trump was elected, because they thought that they are turning a new page. Everyone was anticipating that President Trump and President Erdogan, would go along together because they have a similar, character.
I was going to ask you about that.
Yeah.
What about that? Do you really see similarities between Trump and Erdogan?
Well, both of them are strong men, and both of them are using that textbook definition of populism by manipulating the media, manipulating the judiciary, and trying to transform the country. They don't respect rules and regulations because they believe that inherently they are rigged against them, and they always put a lot of emphasis on the numbers, like crowd sizes, and we're outnumbered. Their primary source of legitimacy is from that, the people. What people say is the right, rather than what the law say or the rules say. And they also believe that there's a hostility toward and suspicion of the elite, so-called corrupt elite, against the pure people. and mainstream media, corporations, special interest groups, they believe that they have a special, intricate relationship with the minorities, trying to steal away their countries and give them to those, Erdogan calls it interest lobby, like referring to those, wealthy people. He's himself wealthy, but he came to power as a champion of the underdog, now turned into a traditional autocrat.
Is the U.S. then overlooking Erdogan's indiscretions, in your opinion?
Well, I think President Trump believes that he can actually deal with Erdogan and Erdogan will not be able to retaliate. I'm not sure how true is that, but Turkey is geopolitically in a place bordering Syria and Iran where the United States is fighting against ISIS, and Turkey's help is crucial. It's also sitting between Europe and the Middle East, where millions of refugees are crossing that country to go to Europe. And as they flood European capitals, they're also affecting elections. The European Union also is interested to dealing with President Erdogan because he's basically shutting the gates to Syrian refugees, which is a big deal in local European politics. So there's that idea, and they have said it repeatedly, openly, that there are some bureaucrats and generals in the Pentagon, in the Justice Department, so-called Obama holdovers, and they are continuing the same policies of the Obama administration, and Trump is unaware of that. And President Erdogan said while coming here that he would tell President Trump that there are some bureaucrats who are just following the path of the Obama administration, and you have to purge them. As Preet Bharara, the Manhattan attorney who was prosecuting Reza Zarrab, the guy I talked moments ago, Erdogan is unhappy with him, and President Trump fired him. So Erdogan believes that other bureaucrats could also be fired as part of this purge in the bureaucracy.
You were facing a lengthy jail term. You have been exiled from your home country. What makes going through what you have endured worth it?
Journalism is not only being able to write or broadcast, correctly or eloquently, but also having this, courageous character, brave character, because you are basically targeting, powerful people, and you are speaking truth to the government. And not every government is constrained by institutional mechanisms like in Europe or in the United States.
Based on what happened in Turkey, the coup attempt and the reaction, or as many people would put it, overreaction by the Erdogan government. What is the cautionary tale in there for the rest of the world, for the United States and other countries?
Right. Well, things that we downplayed as impossible, like this cannot happen here. It cannot go that far. All of them happened. And when we go back like 3 or 4 years ago, and I remember me saying that, of course they cannot, shut us down. Of course they cannot, jail all journalists, and they cannot put all of us in prison. Everything that we said cannot happen happened. And I think one of the biggest mistakes we did in the media, especially, is whenever one of our colleagues was targeted, we remained silent because we didn't like that person because he was a left-minded or right-minded, doesn't matter. And President Erdogan eliminated one by one every journalist. And whenever you put a professor or a journalist or academic or lawyer in prison or a member of the judiciary, it sends a chilling signal to others. So whenever we start writing, we think twice that am I going to face the same consequences with my colleague who basically said the same thing that I'm going to write or speak about. So I think it's important to make sure that judiciary is robust and strong. As I said, President Erdogan furthered his crackdown on dissidents using courts, and this is whenever I look at what President Trump is doing, I'm like, wait a second, I've seen this movie before. It's all familiar to us, because whenever I saw President Trump tweeting out against those federal judges, just imagine that you're a federal judge and there's an immigration ban in front of you, and President Trump is insinuating that if anything bad happens in this country, it's on you. Can you imagine what kind of pressure that puts on these judges? If they say yes to that, they are off the hook. If they say no, if God forbid anything happens here, it will be on them.
There's been intimidation by members of the Trump administration of journalists.
Right.
I would say certainly on a much lesser scale than, obviously, than what's happening in Turkey. But the question is, and many people are wondering about this today in the United States of America, could it happen here? You live in America now. What do you think?
Right. The biggest danger is whenever we talk about authoritarian countries, everyone thinks about Hitler, Stalin, and Iran, China. We have a new fashion of autocracy, and it's Erdogan type of autocracy. It's Trump type of autocracy. Is that you are manipulating one segment of the media, one segment of the society, and pitting one side of the the sector or the people against others. So whenever you are discrediting the media, if there's a bombshell revelation, and I'll give you an example from Turkey, there was a very embarrassing tape recording, phone conversation between President Erdogan and his son, and they were just discussing how to hide this, $1 billion of stash, the money, the corrupt money, and it was all over the news. But because Erdogan discredited the media for years as fake news, as those media outlets who are out there to hunt him down, backed by the military, no one bought. I'm talking about his electorate. No one bought that. Populist leaders seldom lose popularity, and you remember President Trump said during the campaign that if I shoot someone on the Fifth Avenue in Manhattan, I would not lose popularity. He was right, and they are supported by people who think that those leaders can do no wrong, and they know that, and because whenever they violate laws, they're actually becoming more popular, as I said, because they believe that rules and system and the laws are rigged against them. It's designed, drafted by corrupt elite against the people. And now they are channeling the views and will of the people. That's the main source of their legitimacy.
Mahir Zeynalov is a Turkish journalist who documented the massive crackdown on journalists in Turkey and became the first reporter to be deported from Turkey by President Erdogan. He now lives in Washington and was in Pittsburgh to speak to the World Affairs Council. Mahir Zeynalov, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
It's great to be here.